Hi there. Welcome to the inaugural version of SRE From Theory to Practice. My name is Matt Davis, and I'm a staff infrastructure engineer at Blameless. And I work in our infrastructure and SRE team. And I do a lot of operational and architectural types of things over on the operations and systems side. Why don't we go ahead and introduce the rest of our panel today. Yvonne, please go ahead.
Hi, I am Yvonne Lam. I am a staff software engineer at Kong, mostly working on CI and CD things and developer tools. I have done all kinds of deployment engineering and SRE things and ops things. And yeah, that's basically me.
Charles, go ahead, please.
Hi, I'm Charles Cary. I'm Shoreline.io's CTO. Deal with a lot of incidents, anything that kind of gets escalated, lots of ticket routing, in addition to just kind of leading technical development over here. Yeah, and I've been doing ops in various forms for a while now. Was at AWS working on some of those services as well. And yeah, that's what I'm all about.
And I'm Kurt Andersen. I'm a SRE architect here at Blameless also, and previously was with LinkedIn, and before that HP Managed Services. So I've been dealing with operational issues for a long time as well.
I'm glad we have such a nice rounded operational expertise here, because today we're going to talk about on-call, and we're going to talk about basically the overriding question of what is difficult about on-call. And, there's all kinds of ways that we can talk about this. And I think that I'm going to go ahead and start the discussion myself, excuse me, because I happen to be on call this week. I'm not on call at the moment. I actually got someone to cover for me, a new employee who hasn't actually been in the rotation yet, volunteered to cover my shift for the day. So I'd have a good time, get some good sleep, and then be able to do this recording today. Now, one of the things that I like to think about when talking about on-call with other people is the very difficult decisions that we make when we're in the middle of doing our work. And one of the things that I found very difficult, in fact, an incident that happened yesterday, was as the on-call, I was pretty much called upon also with my expertise to mitigate the problem. And I was having some difficulty reaching out. I had some difficulty being a kind of incident commander, if you will. This was a Sev2 incident, and I won't go into our severity levels right now, but it wasn't a low incident and it wasn't a high incident. So something was down, and I, as the engineer, needed to get it fixed. As the person with expertise, I was also the next person who I would probably escalate to get this fixed. So I wasn't able to do things like, oh, should we contact the customer because of this, this blip that might happen? Or, hey, what other communication is going out? So that's one of the things that I was finding really difficult to do while I was actually trying to handle the incident. Yvonne, I'm going to call on you if I may. Is there something, well, let me ask you this first. When's the last time you were on call?
Probably a year or so ago. I mean,
Okay.
And that was on call for internal systems.
Okay.
So,
Describe that. Why do you make that distinction between a non-internal system and an internal system?
it's a little bit different, just in terms of the amount of monitoring support, in terms of the business level of support. So for instance, when I used to work at Chef, I worked for Release Engineering. We owned we were probably like the biggest AWS expense because we ran a giant production build cluster for, something like, I don't know, like around about 100 platforms, so lots of stuff. And it had tentacles in all kinds of places at the time that I was working on it. I mean, it's very different now. And it, being on call for internal things is a little bit different, because a lot of times you just get people, like you get people that you don't necessarily get an alert, right? You're like, you get people saying things like, something seems funny, like my build is slow.
Yeah. That's really interesting, because I think you're right. We tend to not think about our internal customers as customers. I mean, they are customers. Now, is there something that you can recall from being on call back then when you were doing the internal, response?
Mhm.
Do you find that more difficult than being on call for doing an external response?
I find it so. I mean, like, it's different. I don't know that it's more difficult. That in some ways, the pressure is less, because you're not necessarily, it's not necessarily a sub-zero for something that's directly customer facing right this minute, but nobody is fronting for you. Like, that's the thing that's hard, right? Like, it's like you do not have a support team or some kind of customer facing team that is answering the phone or answering emails and saying, yes, we know it's down, we know it's down, we know it's down, right? Like you get 100 people showing up one by one, or texting you saying, do you know that nobody can build anything? And it's like, I know, thank you, yes, on it.
Yep.
This makes me think of another question that we are often faced with. I think this is true of every operation, is what is an incident?
Yes.
Does the fact that it's internal, external mean it isn't or is an incident? I don't know. My personal opinion is it doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
An incident in a complex system is an incident.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think that we had, like, one of the reasons why we had a pretty serious on-call rotation for the build systems, for the build platform, is that, well, right about the time that I started, we got hit with Heartbleed, right? So
wow.
Our ability to rebuild our software to mitigate customer issues was at risk, because we first had to mitigate things in, because we had a bunch of stuff go wrong with our build platform too. So that is, yeah. So, so it's, we tend to think of on-call as something that mostly affects people in the SaaS world, but, I think there's a movement towards having it be like, if it affects your ability to get things to customers, then, there's an on-call, there may be an on-call there may be some kind of an incident structure that you want to have.
Right. The QA system is down.
Yep.
We cannot QA
Yes.
more, much less deploy, but I've hit that instance in the past. I've taken down QA in the past.
Well, and they're offline systems too, right? Like so many places are doing sort of like data crunching, machine learning, like all of those pipelines. It's like how big a deal is it if your machine learning pipeline goes down? I mean, there's probably nothing bad is going to happen right this minute, but over time, somebody's service, that it's like people's service will be impacted. Like, there's some kind of a data quality measure that you will not be able to meet.
Yeah.
Speaking from experience, when you have pipelines that take 22 hours to run, and if they fail at hour 18, you're a day behind by the time you even just restart the pipeline, and it can have really serious impacts on user experience, I'll say, in general.
People like seeing their updates right away. Like, that makes them feel like something has happened, like it's important.
Right. Or seeing an appropriate list of people that you might want to connect with.
Or being served the correct ad. That's something that I've had this same exact experience like you're saying, Kurt, where well, this feed takes 24 hours to process. We actually won't know until tomorrow if something went wrong.
Mhm.
And then, it's difficult to know, well, should we stop the feed because we know this is broken, or do we wait until we see the results to understand how broken it got? So it's
And these are very interesting and difficult problems that are being grappled with in the OpML community, which is essentially looking at how do you apply kind of reliability principles in the context of machine learning and training scenarios, which can take significant amounts of time and hardware to process.
yeah. Hey, Charles, how about you? When we think about things that are difficult for an on-call engineer to do, to make difficult decisions, what crosses your mind?
Sure. I think one of the most challenging things is assessing customer impact. And the reason I bring that up is often, you're on call, right? And what you're thinking about is, is the system functioning or not? Is there something I should be attending to right now? Or often if it's a quiet shift, like people, to be honest, they start doing other stuff, unfortunately, which can happen. And then what'll happen is like you jump into the moment of the issue. And I think folks often, you're now like in a debugging mindset when like actually the first thing that needs to be sussed out is like, well, irrespective of what the ticketing system has declared in terms of the severity of the issue, like, is this a global outage? Does this impact all the customers? Does it impact only a subset? Is it one customer, right? And then really the next part of that is, beyond just how many customers, for those that it does impact, what is the impact? Is it just a degradation of the service? Is it a total outage? Is it like a data loss event, right? And the reason I think it matters is like, that's how how quickly should I be escalating right now, right? Because even if you know exactly what to do, if it's a meaningful percentage of the customers, and let's say it's a potential data loss event, you probably should escalate immediately, right? Like irrespective of it's like, hey, I just need to restart this instance. It's like, well, yeah, but the business ramifications are such that you better let people know, because we have to begin, preparing to talk to folks or doing a deeper analysis of like, well, what really happened? What was the impact of that? And I find that that's also a really hard thing for folks to quickly train on. Like you can train on runbooks, you can train by observing others. It takes a long time to build up an intuitive sense of, for this specific business, if certain things happen, what is the true severity and who do I need to talk to like really fast?
Ooh, I'm so glad you used the word intuition here, the intuitive sense, because when we get called, we're almost automatically into that firefighting mode, because for whatever reason we've been paged, so our cognition gets a little blip and we're like automatically into this mode of what patterns are matching right now. And so
Exactly.
that intuition we really have to lean on. I was thinking while you were describing that, how would an on-call engineer even know that restarting this thing will result in data loss and therefore will result in so many customers having a data outage? And how would they even know that? How would they even know to immediately think, oh, this may mean data loss, I better escalate to the data team or whatever? I don't know the answer to that question. Have you seen any examples of how an on-call person would do that?
Well, I think it usually comes from spending time. I think I've heard other folks talk about this, but I think it's really true that like in on call, it's hard to replace time spent on call. Like often, just reading documentation or working on code doesn't actually give you like a systemic model in your brain of how the system works. But like being on incidents does, it seems to at least. And so I do think there's like an hours of practice aspect to on call in terms of how one gets there. I think the general technique I recommend to people is, since it's hard to develop strategies to develop intuition, if you don't have them, which is true at the beginning, the most important thing I find is to create like a kind of a culture where it's okay to escalate really fast, right? In the sense that someone in the org has an intuition about this. I think it's important to establish, hey, it's okay to go and page other people, even if they may come back and say like, come on, it's this small thing, it's not a big deal. It's important to make that safe to do, because otherwise I think it's very hard to develop the intuition, right? And it's usually just not possible, I think, even reading the code. It's very hard. You have to see the running system and experience it.
Yeah, and feeling safe that you can escalate to someone is really, really important. Being able to think, because I've hit this in the past myself, being on call, it's 3 a.m.
Yes.
I don't
Like
want
you're
to
waking
wake up
someone
Rob
up.
right now.
Yeah.
You know? What were you going to say, Yvonne?
Oh, that you're waking a person up, right?
Waking a person up. Yeah.
So I wanted to ask a question because you brought up the escalation term, Charles. Does that imply some sort of directionality? Is it a matter of, like Matt was alluding, it's 3 a.m. I don't know what's going to go on. I'm going to call my manager. I'm going to call the PR team. I'm going to call a colleague. I'm going to call somebody who's on another team but is basically a peer. What do you have in mind when you say escalation, Charles?
Yeah, sometimes I'll see that there's like a notion of a formal escalation, like there's like kind of a bit of a command and control hierarchy and on call, and there's like primary, secondary, sometimes tertiary, it can be extended arbitrarily. I don't know if that's not really the only escalation. I think like when I say escalation, it's maybe the way to define it is just go get other people because you don't know it, whoever those people may be, right, in whatever capacity. And I think in terms of, if I had to provide guidance to folks in who should they go and get, one valuable thing to develop when being on call is not necessarily who's the expert in everything, because you can't page the expert every single time. They might be busy at that moment too, like with another issue, like which happens. Yeah. I think it is useful though to have a mental map of for the different subcomponents of what you're trying to control. Is there a one-hop person in each direction that you're comfortable escalating to, so that like in the kind of limit, you get to the person who can help? And so it's more about just kind of, well, here are all my supporting services. Do I have a contact on them that I'm comfortable talking to? Here are my downstream services. And so kind of building up a little bit of that, the next hop, so to speak, I think is useful. And maybe that's probably a better term than escalation.
When the way you described it, I would actually even call that a little bit of adaptive capacity. Being able to lean on those other people. I'm exhausting my capacity in this area of expertise. I need to tap into someone else's adaptive capacity to be able to help me with this problem. And that feels a lot more lateral than a escalation up kind of thing.
And it almost
Yvonne,
sounds like your case that you mentioned, Matt, of you got in, you started debugging, looking at it technically, almost having a one hop saying, hey, I need somebody to run the incident for me while I look at as the technical responder or the technical expert. That could be one of these one hop resources to be able to take advantage of as well.
Oh yeah. Yeah, you're right. Like probably as I look back on my time with the incident yesterday, I can think of several examples where it would have made, and I'm looking in hindsight, I know this, and maybe there were opportunities for me to reach out to other people, and that's something else I've just talking about that difficulty, being able to, we talk about flow, and we talk about getting into the intuition of a system, and oftentimes, and I like drawing parallels with music because that's what I do. but oftentimes when you're, when you're playing the gig and when you're into the gig, when you're in the middle of an incident and you're basically in a flow of a sense, because you're constructing this mental model in your head about what you know the system is about, and then you're actually building on that mental model in real time as you learn about the failure states, and then you're pulling people across and you're in this flow. It's like, how do you break out of that flow and remember to reach out to that next hop? Yvonne, what do you think? Have you ever run into this problem where you don't know where to find expertise? Or
Yep, absolutely. I mean, I work a lot with build systems, right? And so no matter how hard teams try to make a very clear line between this is the build platform and this is the application, and we deal with everything over here that happens to the application, and you all deal with everything over there that happens to the build platform. In reality, there are lots of bugs where it's not clear where the problem is, right? Like the ever popular, my build is slow. Right. I mean, that it's like, well, sometimes that's slow for system reasons, and sometimes it's slow because of an application change or a change to the application build. But I feel like one of the things that I'm trying to figure out how to do is get us to the point where like we're actually good at working on those kind of in-between issues. That it's like I tend to feel that like in software, that we tend to be sort of very focused on a very ownership model driven, a very legalistic driven, and it's like, okay, so that's kind of like the ends, that's kind of like the floor, but that shouldn't be the ceiling, right? Like we should just be able to say, I don't know, the ML system looks like it's doing something weird, and I don't have we need to have like people cross-disciplinary, cross-department, where we can go and say, look, this just looks funny. Like, you can tell me that I'm wrong. If y'all want to laugh at me afterwards, I'm fine. But I am really concerned because this does not look right to me.
And you describe that as the in-between, and would you say that's kind of like the same area that a lot of people talk about glue work? Or is it, or are you thinking of something different? Or
I do think that it's very related to glue, because a lot of that is it's because part of your mental model isn't just who's the next team on the list, right? Like, it's like, who do I have a relationship with that I won't feel bad about asking them to look at this? Like, like not just, do they know something, but do I feel okay talking to them?
Oh yeah. The relationship is actually more attractive to you than the expertise. That's fascinating. We're humans, and so we live in this social construct. That's how we are human. That's how we're mammals. We're in a society, and we build these relationships. And yeah, I can think of that right now, when just like that, getting paged at 3 a.m. Well, I have a better relationship with my mentor than I do with the expert that built the system. My mentor is going to be a lot more forgiving that I woke them up at 3 a.m. and can help me through this thing that I'm completely, I'm just out of my element about. Whereas I might think the expert is they might look down on me, or they might think I don't know what I'm doing. And I can see this like cognitive dissonance getting in the middle of like trying to make that decision. That's a really, I hadn't thought about it that way. In that the escalation, that next top may actually not be the expert. It just may be the most reasonable place for you to reach to, right, when you are under strain yourself.
And I encountered that a lot too, in terms of having a team of SREs and all of you kind of sharing a rotation, if you like. And I think that's one of the benefits of a primary secondary on call structure, is that you have a defined next hop. If you're the primary and you get a call, you've got somebody who's already on deck, so to speak, that you can reach out to for building a shared understanding. And sometimes experts can be a little prickly, and
Yeah.
and especially if they get overloaded with everybody asking them questions. I mean, that's another downside of kind of siloed information, or experts who don't share information effectively, is that then everybody does have to ask them questions and call them to get an answer.
Yeah, and you can also run the danger of that expert experiencing tunnel vision,
Yeah.
which experts are, I I kind of like to say it, they're allowed to do that, but you have to help them through it. That's
Yes.
where the expert needs help, is breaking them out of their expertise so that they don't fall into that tunnel vision and going, well, it has to be this. This is my area of expertise, so this is where I'm going to look.
Right.
Kind of thing.
Or it's another really negative thing that I've seen as a pattern, is this idea of mean time to innocence, where you get everybody to swarm on an incident, and then everybody looks for the fastest way to escape possible. Oh, not my system, bye. And it's essentially try to not be responsible or deny responsibility and get out of there. And then it becomes difficult for the person who's stuck coordinating the incident or responding as the tech lead to say, oh, wait a minute, it actually is the DNS. And so we got to go get the DNS people back in here because they bailed early or something. And I'm picking on DNS just because that's the kind of the paradigm.
And that raises the cost of being wrong too, because it's like, what if you're like, oh, it is DNS, and then you call them back and it's not DNS, right? Like, so that's,
yeah,
that I feel like a lot of where the interesting to me work is like lowering the cost of being wrong.
Yes, that's absolutely right.
Nice.
That sounds to me like helping people make difficult decisions.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like the same kind of thing. It's like, and also, going back to what Charles was saying about feeling safe to escalate, like, I would put it another way, feeling safe to admit you're wrong, or feeling safe to admit I don't know, or being able to say that. And I've done this too. And actually I was thinking about this question. When on call, we're often faced with learning opportunities. In fact, I would guess every single incident is a learning opportunity. And so when we're actively on call, I often wonder about this. How hard is it to remember that this is a learning opportunity? This isn't just an outage. This is an opportunity where our complexity has opened itself up for us to see inside it, and whether it may be a very narrow view or maybe wide, but those are the times that we can learn a lot about our coworkers, about our company, about how we organize our work, and about the technical aspects of the system. Charles, have you run into anything like this where you've faced or have seen this, where responders or engineers are faced with, do I learn or do I get this fixed as fast as possible?
That's a good question. I mean, my general recommendation is mitigate as quickly as possible, just for the sake of like minimizing customer impact.
Sure.
In terms of learning, I do believe you learn to be a better on call by being at the incidents themselves. In terms of translating that into kind of deeper observations, right? Like the place where I see it being very useful is I I am a great believer in doing at least some of the on-call for the software you write. And the reason is I think like in those moments, you kind of recognize where maybe the software was inadequate. and like in particular, like there's a lot of stuff that's easy to take for granted because it'll get through quite a bit of testing, but then fails in prod. Like just understanding the benefits of like logging, other telemetry, building systems that handle exceptions in the general case, right? Building things that are self-healing, building things that have self-defense, right? Like all of those kind of principles, which aren't really necessary for like application correctness. If you have an on-call where, well, if folks who wrote the application are never on call, one of the things is that the learning doesn't feed back to the development process. And I find that like that's one place where you can create a virtuous cycle where development improves if folks do some on call, at least some, and they become better at the engineering practice as well because they think about how they will feel in that moment.
How about you, Yvonne? Learning while you're on call.
Oh, so I was going to take Charles's answer in a little bit of a different direction, which is that, I've known a lot of devs who ended up getting put on call for a service that they wrote, and they don't see the value in it. Like, I think as ops people, as SRE, like, I mean, nobody likes being on call, right? Like it's a chore. But for us, like, when you start a new job and then you get to be on call, it's not like this is fun, but it's like, okay, I'm a member of the team, I'm pulling my weight, I'm trusted enough that people think that I won't shut down some critical service. I mean, they might be wrong, but like I am trusted enough. Whereas, like one of the devs that I've worked with described being on call for, this sort of complicated distributed system as he just felt like his job was being a sleep protector. It was like giving the experts a few more hours of sleep and he couldn't really do anything. And like that, like, I don't know that he was completely correct. I mean, like, I think he did more than he thinks he did. But I do think there's something about like, how do we make that experience of on-call valuable to devs? Like, I think a lot of times what happens too is that there's stuff that's valuable to individual devs, like, that sometimes, there's some things you only learn by experiencing them, and it's like, having nice retry logic, for instance, stuff like that. Like I think that's all good, but I think the harder thing is where the team has to fight for something that would make their on-call lives better, that makes for a better service, and they have to do that learning together. I think that's often very hard for people.
That's a good point, because I've had that experience too with developers on both sides of the fence where they didn't see the need for them to be on call. They shouldn't be on call. It's not the way they think. It's not the way they work. It's not the way they do their thing. It's not them. And so it was really hard to get them to see on call in a different light. At the same time, I've seen developers embrace it 100%. And I think it's a really interesting question. I forget who tweeted this, but it was some video of a bunch of cops chasing a guy, and the guy had run behind a van, and all the cops ran right by the van where the guy was hiding. The helicopter filming it knew exactly where the guy was, but all the cops ran around the guy. And someone made a tweet comment like, oh, this is like seeing newbie people on call when you know what the answer is, but you want them to discover how to fix it. And I'm wondering if that sort of thing kind of ties into this, like experiencing on call, but then how do you make it exciting? How do you make it, an opportunity? how do we spin it on its head, and instead of it being something bad that happens, show that this is actually just normal. This is just the system operating. The system is operating in a normal way, always on the brink of failure, and we just happen to catch the system right when it touched that brink. And so that's where we are. And I have trouble answering this question myself. I don't know.
think a lot of
one
people,
way that
a lot of
one way
people
that I
don't want to
think-
take that red pill.
Well, and I think that I think there's also a very human desire to be done with things. Like, okay, I shipped my feature, it's done, right? Like I checked in my code change and it's done. Like I think it was Liz Fongray at Honeycomb said something about how like they found that 3.5 hours is kind of when they is kind of their limit on situational awareness for somebody checks in a change and they haven't paged it out enough that if something happens in production, they're like, oh wait, that could be me. And like she said it in a tweet, so I don't have a reference off the top of my head, but I do think that that's a very interesting thing, that it's like, since I work on CI/CD pipelines, I do think that's something that it's like what is the, I mean, it's not just the speed, but it's, there's something about the when do people have enough situational awareness around change to think, oh, you know what, that could be my thing?
That's a good question. Because I think that changes from person to person. It's a very, very subjective thing to have situational awareness, which is a troublesome thing to begin with.
Yep.
Which situation are we being aware of? Right.
Mm-hmm.
I've never heard the 3.5 hour thing, but that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Okay, we finally deployed this. I have another ticket. I'm going to close this ticket. I'm going to move on to my next ticket, or I'm going to pull another ticket from the backlog. I can't be thinking about this while I'm trying to get into my next new part of work.
Well, and something I read the other day too pointed out that being on high alert for issues is fatiguing. Just maintaining that sense of awareness and alertness to the risk of failure is something that requires effort. And it's easy to understand. I think it may have come up in the context of one of the talks last week from SRECon, where the SRE, one of the managers for the MS Teams organization, was talking about the load on the teams for on-call when the pandemic started. And all of a sudden, everybody was all the schools in the world were piling into Teams for virtual classrooms, and they had rotations that were a week long, and people were being crisped out of that, and so they ended up having to go to 1-day rotations for on-call just because it was so much of a burden on the people.
Wow. It makes me think of the burden of on-call translating into the burden of feeling like you have to be the one to fix the problem. I struggle with this all the time as a responder, and I think I struggle with it because I do contain an area of expertise, and I want to be able, I really genuinely want to be able to fix it. But it kind of goes back to what Charles was saying before, at what point do you hit the escalation button? And when do you feel like you've
But the escalation button, I think part of the question there though is the escalation button is not an eject button.
Yep.
It is not a defeat button.
Yep.
And if it feels that way, then it's going to cause people to be unwilling to use it. And I noticed that our time is running short here also. So I don't want to have the last word on this, but I think it's important to not view escalating as abdicating your responsibility.
Charles, you're nodding
Yeah,
vociferously.
that's absolutely right. And I think that escalate means I'd like you to help me solve this problem is usually how I kind of portray it to folks. Now, if it's ongoing, there needs to be relief at some point. It doesn't mean you're like tied to it forever, but there is some amount of, when you bring another person in, you're not working with them and continuing to do it, right? And I think that's only fair to whoever you're escalating to. And that's going back, that is one of those opportunities to learn, right? Like in the sense that that's where you can actually get, even if you can't really contribute meaningfully to the debugging anymore, that's how you can actually see, things to learn. And so escalation, even if you're taking a back seat in terms of the kind of ongoing effort, it's usually worthwhile, at least till the shift runs.
And something I would add too is that, I don't think we should be hard on ourselves about wanting to solve the problem, because like all of tech culture is about being the person with the answers, right? Like there's no way we can just turn that off on our brains when we're on call, even if we know that it's not a good idea.
You're absolutely right. We want to be the hero. We want to be the person who figured it out. We want to be, we want to show that we did something on this on-call shift. I couldn't work on feature work all week or all day or whatever, but hey, look what I learned. Look what I fixed. And I was on call and I did that.
Right. But I did that at 3 a.m. all by myself.
Exactly. Oh yeah. Oh, no one knew about it. I didn't have to escalate at 3 a.m. Ha ha ha. Well, I wanted to thank everyone for joining. Thank you, Charles. Thank you, Yvonne. It's been a wonderful time talking to you. This conversation has sparked some ideas and some moments of learning for me, and I really hope it's done the same for you all.
Absolutely.
Right. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you all. It was a great conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.